A lot of things have happened this week in Nigeria, from the NYSC reforms to the debates about whether or not Nigeria should have state police. And so, for this video, I am going to pick one of those topics, that of the state police, and I'm going to explore it with you. I'm going to dive into exactly what the state police is, what the idea of it is, anyway. I'm going to delve into what the arguments for and against the state police have been to help us make an informed decision. And then I'm going to be putting in my 2 cents at the end of the video. Let's get started. Once again, my name is Arizura Koroma, and I'm the owner of this channel. There, I said it, where I simply say what's on my mind. I think of a thing, I do a bit of research on it, and then I come out here and I say it to you. Now, let's get started with the state police. What is the state police? State police refers to a police force that is strictly controlled, not strictly controlled, but strictly refined to a particular state, right? So the appointing of a commissioner, recruiting, termination, and processing of um, promotions is all handled within the state, right? And there's an additional clause they want to add that will prevent people like authority figures like the governor from issuing directives directly to the state police in order to do anything for personal gain, because we know we have a lot of loopholes around that in Nigeria and it often happens. So that is a definite real fear. Now let's get into some of the arguments for the state police that have been going around. Mind you, these are arguments by authority figures, people that have the voices and will actively contribute to whether or not this bill is eventually brought into play within Nigeria. It's been passed in the National Assembly, but we haven't really seen it go into effect yet. And so these arguments are shaping the political thoughts and opinions of people around whether or not the state police should happen. Let's get into it. So, for the first argument for, the first argument for is that of the security and responsiveness of local intelligence. So, what this basically covers is that with power or with the instructions coming directly from and within the state police would be able to get intelligence much faster. They would be able to carry out activities within their own state since the instructions come much faster. And so, operations would be done. It would basically be like being at home and being able to do things in your own home without needing the directives of someone else at, let's say, a different building in your estate, right? So it's within the state, and so these directives will come off much faster, and so intelligence and actions and directive would also be faster. That's the first argument for this, for the state police. Let's delve into the second one. The second one is the scale of the crisis. Now, between January this year, is it this year? Well, okay, so let's not say this year, but between last year and this year, Nigeria has seen a significant increase. Let's not say significant, but there has certainly been a noticeable increase in the amount of terrorist attacks and killings that have been happening in various and several states, and it's becoming alarming. It's come to the point where people no longer feel safe, and we've had to speak out on several occasions. We've had to organize protests. It's becoming even more increasing that the federal government can't do anything about it. And so, one of the arguments for the state police is that the federal system simply cannot keep up. Imagine, like I said in the last point, directives will come faster, and so intelligence too would come faster. And so, the state police would be able to respond to and interfere. I said intervene, and be able to intervene in these matters much quicker than the federal system would be able to, because when these attacks happen, we usually look to the federal government as it currently stands. We look to the federal government to deploy troops or to create some kind of political or military strategy in order to deal with whatever incident or kidnapping happens in whatever state that it happens in. And so, for this argument, they say the response time is simply too slow. Let's move on to the next one. All right. So for the next one, it's that it works everywhere. So the US has state police, Canada has state police. India also has state police, as well as Germany. They have a kind of like a force that handles their own state police. And so the argument for this particular case is that we have a blueprint for how these things should work. We have a blueprint from other countries, like a roadmap to follow. We've seen how well it works. We've seen how accepted it is in those states, right? And we've seen how state police just reflects community police. It's a lot. We've seen that it's a lot closer to the heart of the people, and this I said requirements, the laws, the rules through with which the state police in other countries abide by as tailored to those states, and basically we have a blueprint for how the state police should work. And since it works in other democracies, it should work in Nigeria. That's the argument. Let's move on to the next one and the last. True federalism. And so, when Nigeria initially adopted federalism, it had this law in place. This was during the First Republic before we had all the military coups and all that. So, this system was already in place. And so, because it aligns with Nigeria's original idea of true federalism and what we initially were, because of that, this is the second argument basically states that state police is something that should happen for the name and for upholding to so that we can continue to uphold with the true identity of, or rather the true philosophy behind federalism, right? Now all of those arguments are, well, there are four, the state police, and if you go online and you do a bit more reading about it, watch the news, you'll see more detailed information on these arguments by different people. You should go out and check it out. But these arguments, I would like us to, while listening to this, have your own opinions, have your own thoughts, because Nigeria is different. Nigeria is diverse. Everyone has their own like experiences with both police, with the political system, with the Nigerian system in general, right? And so we all have our own opinions. So keep that in mind. Now, let's go for the opinions, or rather the arguments against state police. The first one is political weaponization fears. So basically, there are, and I think this is the most obvious fear that we have with the state police being put in place, is that the governors, the authority figures in each state would use the state police to their own advantage, take advantage of it to get rid of the political enemies, issue private directives to the state police without any form of repercussions or any laws set in place that could curb them. And so that is one of the major fears that people against the state police have. And it's a lot of it's I feel like that's a major fear that a lot of people will have at first upon hearing of the state police and exactly how it will work. But take note that well, if we do a bit more reading, I think we'll find out that, like I said earlier, the state police, the law being passed is that the governors can't really issue directives directly to the state police because of issues of this particular issue, this particular fear that's like for at the forefront, right? But there's a difference between reality and whether or not that would, like, there's a difference between the idea of it and whether or not it would actually hold, and that's not something we get to see yet. Now, another thing that I should note is that during the First Republic, when we did the whole true federalism thing, when we did that, the Nigerian state police was also being used by the governors to inflict terror upon the citizens of a particular state. And so this fear of theirs is grounded in something that has happened in the past. And this is not me fear mongering, right? Because with the lessons that we've learned in the past, obviously we could do some things differently this time. Let's move on to the next one. The governance and accountability problems. Now, this particular one argues that it's not so the state police was originally created to deal with the idea behind it anyway was to directly deal with the issue of terrorism that has happened these past few years. That's the reason why we want the state police, because it would just be quicker in order to handle these things. And so an argument for this one, I think I remember this particular argument. It's that, excuse me. So that for this particular argument is that the getting rid of terrorism or terrorist attacks is not about whether or not there are faster response times. but it's about the political will and sort of like accountability, because these I mean the police in a particular state are already supposed to do what they can to protect a particular state, to protect the people in a particular state. But that rather than us bringing in a new bill, a new law in order to fix this issue, that we should amend the political will behind it. So basically, the political leaders, the authority figures should be more committed to preventing these crimes rather than introducing the state police to deal with it, because it doesn't really and it wouldn't really be a proper cure for the issue of terrorism and terrorist attacks in Nigeria. Let's move on to the next one. The next one is state capacity issues. For this particular argument is for the fact that there are several poor states in Nigeria, and so if the state police is established and the control or rather funding and everything of a particular state is left up to the state, there are states that are poorer than most and they would not be able to provide proper equipment, proper infrastructure for their police forces in order for them to properly carry out their duties and their jobs. So there is a huge, like, there's a huge gap in wealth and finances, and there are extremely poor states in Nigeria that simply would not be able to handle it. That's simply the argument. And then the last one is The last one is that it is a symptom, not a cure, right? Because Nigeria's 1999 constitution over centralizes a lot of parts, a lot of systems in Nigeria. There are a lot of systems that are centralized in Nigeria. And so if we are trying to diversify or like decentralize that, this would only treat a system, it would only treat a symptom. It wouldn't really directly affect the fact that uh, the federal government has its hand in too many affairs that should otherwise be decentralized. I think that's the argument behind this. I didn't do too much reading on it, but that's basically the idea. Now, both sides of this particular argument, they have very solid points. I think that these are proper, reasonable arguments, and I feel like everybody has even more evidence and even more proof as to why, whether or not they support or are against the state police. But this is what I would say. Now, at this point, I am not for either. I do not want to sway the thoughts of anybody. I think both sides have provided reasonable and a good arguments for whether or not the state police should happen. But I think that beyond looking at what it is ideally and whether or not this thing should happen, firstly, I think that we should look at the intention of who is bringing this thing forward, who has decided that we should create a state police, who brought the bill forward, right? Look at their political affiliations, look at their designation, look at their political history, not just their political history, some of the other things that they've done. And then we truly get to understand whether the idea of the state police that this person wants to bring in is one of good or bad. Because if they decided, oh, yeah, I'm going to bring this thing into play and I want this thing to happen, and they've already mapped out how they're going to use it for good or for their own benefit. In fact, just for good, and that good may be strictly for them or it may be good for the Nigerian people. Now, I would say that I would probably go for the state police. I do have the fear of it being privatized, of it being the governor's own private army. But I think that by establishing it now, it's something that in the long run, Nigerians would be able to benefit from, because I do love the idea of community police. I think that it should just be established now, and so as we keep on working on Nigeria to get it better to some point, it's a system that we would already have in place. Otherwise, if we the other argument for this is that if we create it now, we could completely bastardize it, we could corrupt the system now so much that even when we're good, it will be one of the things that we'd have to fix. Right. So honestly, it's a doozer. So let me know what you think in the comments. Are you for or against? Why? And some other thoughts you have. Thank you for listening. That's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.